The truth is already there inside of them. They don't need anybody telling them what's true. And they can, if they get some basic human skills, which nobody teaches us, they can also wake up spiritually. So I like to teach the basic human skills, and they don't teach in school, like, do you know whether your thoughts are true or false? Because most of us think every thought in our head is true, and most of them are false. Do you know what your emotions even are, or where they come from? Audience, did anybody train you in this stuff? Nobody trained me. If I hadn't gone to acting school and done a lot of therapy after acting school, I still wouldn't know. And so I teach people how to first be human, and then using very simple tools, how to wake up into their divine enlightened state, or to put it scientifically, open their right brain up and get it online.
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who's out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode. Hey, welcome to The Exploding Human. My name is Bob Nickman. My guest today is Jon Labman, and we're going to be talking about his life's work and passion of helping people overcome trauma, anxiety, self-doubt, and low self-esteem while awakening to their deepest nature. Jon has an incredibly interesting story. He grew up with a lot of childhood trauma, which lasted well into his teens, 20s, and beyond. He was in a religious cult and explored a variety of careers, from Broadway acting to a very eclectic path to healing himself. Jon has gotten degrees in psychology, trauma therapy. He's a yoga instructor and really a spiritual teacher. Jon is incredibly open about everything that has happened to him and that has transpired, and he has helped so many people over the years. This is Jon Labman.
Thank you for inviting me on, and to your listeners, give this man some appreciation. He's doing this stuff for free, guys, so if you can give him a 5-star rating, or like him on Instagram or wherever you see this, I'm sure he'd appreciate it. And we appreciate him for bringing us education and an opportunity to talk to each other.
Wow. Okay, you're hired, buddy.
Well, it's true.
Good audition. That was a great... Well, I do it for free because I have to. I want to. It's a passion of mine to talk to the most interesting people I've met in my ever met in my life at this later stage of my existence.
Well, for both of us, I'm almost 70, right? So
yeah. Well, I am officially 70.
Okay.
And I'll be 71 in February, but I'm reading at a 72-year-old level, so things. Okay. So things are really going well.
That's great.
Yeah,
that's great.
So, Jon, your story is quite astonishing, and as I was telling you before we started, I've had a lot of folks on here. For some reason, it just gravitates to this show periodically, and recently even more so. People that have had some very traumatic experiences, and
yeah,
I like to talk about this because I think there's a lot of people that have a lot of shame about things that have happened to them and don't want to talk about it. And the important thing, if people are going to heal, and this is true of anything, is you've got to bring it out of the shadows into the light. And that's what we're going to do today. So why don't you tell the folks a little bit about what happened and how you arrived at where you are today, which we're going to talk about after, because there's always hope, folks.
Right. Well, I actually want to start with the after so that they know that the story leads somewhere that isn't sort of dark and horrible.
Oh, okay. Well, let's try that. Okay.
Yeah. So currently I'm a liberation therapist, and I combine the best of psychology and spirituality to provide healing, and even all the way to spiritual liberation for anyone who wants to go there. And how it started out is I was raised with sexual abuse in my home, which was totally forgotten about because it started when I was probably about 3 years old. And I wasn't the only one who was sexually abused. And that information was so sequestered in my brain, as will be the case with so many of your listeners, that I did not remember until it was happening to the next generation. And then it all started to come back, and I was 52 years old when that happened. In the meantime, I was a miserable kid at school. I was picked on relentlessly, very effeminate. I was gay, but I didn't know it. And I didn't even know what it meant in, 1965, 1969, 70. I didn't know what that meant. I really thought it was men who wore dresses, which of course that's not what it is. But, that was my child's idea of what that meant. And I was also very uncoordinated, which is a side effect of trauma. It's very hard to be present within the body when you've been traumatized and you can't remember it all because your nervous system has been provoked into an unfamiliar and dysfunctional state. And so, I would go to school and get picked on a lot and was last chosen for the ball teams always and couldn't throw a ball to save my life. And, I was getting by with being the teacher's pet, but that provoked more anger and jealousy from my fellow students. And at about 10 years old, my mother remarried. She divorced my father when I was 6. And my stepbrother was the quintessential athlete who was torturing me at school, and he was doing it at home. And one day I just kind of lost my mind and almost killed him. And if my brother hadn't pulled me off of him, I would have. All this pent up anger, frustration, resentment, fatigue, anxiety, just this terrible stress level that I was going through. Nobody knew about what I felt. I started seeing a therapist then, but I also had an opportunity presented to our 10th grade class, 750 kids sitting in an auditorium, right? And they're showing us a film about an international high school on the south coast of Wales in the UK, in a Hearst castle, kids from 50 countries, and something inside said, I got to get out of my current life. And I ran down the front of the room and signed up to go to that school. About the same time, I started exploring my spirituality and started, even though I was raised in a Reformed Jewish home, Reformed Jews were about as kind of unspiritual in our community as, the sort of blandest Protestants, right? Just sort of general, we go to church because it's a good thing to do. And so I was really looking for answers to my suffering. I didn't know exactly why I had such a bad life, but I knew it was bad. And so I started studying the New Testament. I started praying and saying, God, if you exist, get me into this school, because they told our family that the family made too much money and they wouldn't provide a scholarship for me. And the family said, we can't afford to send you to international high school and then pay for college for 4 kids. So you're on your own, buddy. If you don't get the money from the school, you're not going. So for a month, there was a postal strike. And I was waiting a whole month for that letter from the school, which finally got to me. I got the acceptance to the school April 1st. May 1st, I got the letter saying, you got your financial aid. So the first big turning point in my life was I went to school in Wales and I thought, great, all my problems are solved. But after finishing that wonderful experience, getting to travel in Europe and to Israel and other places, I came back to the United States and to my life and found that there were all kinds of interior problems. I was depressed a lot. I was anxious. I was dissociative, which means I was often numbing out, checking out, not with drugs or alcohol, but just kind of, I would just sort of disappear. And so I started at Haverford College, which in those days, 1973, was all male. And I basically had a nervous breakdown because I was studying Immanuel Kant, the Critique of Pure Reason, who basically takes the world and dissolves it, which is what happens in the spiritual search eventually, but not prepared for it at 18. And also, I couldn't deal with my own same-sex attractions. So I left that school and eventually went to an evangelical college where I was studying to be a minister. In the meantime, my mother divorced her second husband. I had no home to go to. I was on my own. One summer at school, I found a roommate and just stayed at school all summer. And then I met some people who belonged to one of the denominational churches, and they said, you know, we're starting a fledgling community. So why don't you come and spend the summer with us? And boy, there it was, a ready-made family, and the woman who was really the head of the church behind the scenes gave me a 2 hour love bombing. She listened to my life more than anyone ever had. And so I ended up in a cult.
Mm.
And I made promises that I'd stay there for my whole life. And they devolved into a brainwashing cult. And it was just like growing up. I was living in terror all over again every day of my life. And finally, toward the end of that experience, somebody tried to burn the church down. Like, holy smokes. A bad pun,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, really good pun.
And
Somebody within the community or somebody from outside?
we
Or you
don't
don't
really
know?
know who it was,
Okay.
but the same woman who really was behind the leaders of the church said, "Okay, this isn't our fault as leaders. You guys are hiding sin. So you're all suspended from communion, and we're going to spend a year. You're going to help us rebuild the church. But if you haven't confessed your hidden sins by the time you're moving pews back into the church, you're doubly damned to hell." Okay,
Yeah.
and you know, your listeners and others have probably heard this kind of language
Yeah, sure. It's
in your
it's
worst
cult
nightmares.
language.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's very serious brainwashing.
right. So I finally, about 6 months in, confessed that I thought I was gay. I mean, I had the attraction, so I kind of knew something was going on. They said, "Well, that's not your hidden sin. You've never acted on it. So, buddy, you're SOL. You're out of luck." And for another 6 months, I paced the floor of the home I lived in with 4 or 5 other guys, trying to figure out what to do because they said, well, if you're really gay and you leave the church, you're going to get AIDS and go to hell. And if you stay and don't confess your secret sin, you're doubly damned to hell. So this is what your listeners would know as a double bind. I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't. But somebody else is making the choices for you and telling you what the choices are, which is why a double bind isn't real. So at that point, I finally got up the pluck to leave. All the other guys were somewhere else on a Saturday morning. Got everything in my car, made quick trips to a storage facility that I'd located nearby, and fled. And the next day, I was in a therapist's office, and that woman saved my life because I felt hopeless. I felt like I was going to go to hell. I was suicidal. It wasn't the first time that I'd felt suicidal. I'd never acted on that either. And I'd been in a hospital, you know, about 8 years earlier with electroconvulsive therapy, trying to deal with depression. And this woman said to me, "You're sitting here in my office. Don't you realize that you have some hope?"
Mm.
And, you know, listeners, you may also have this sense that you know something's wrong. You know you shouldn't have any hope, but you do. And you got to go then and figure out, okay, who am I? What do I think and feel? What's really true? And what's brainwashing and what's hooey or BS or whatever you want to call it. And that woman, I loved what she did for me. She helped me come out of the closet. She helped me look at the leaving of the cult as a divorce rather than some religious problem. And by the time I was finished with her, I really wanted to do what she was doing for me.
Ah, yeah, yeah. How long did it take to unwind all that programming? Would you say
I would say it probably took another 10, 15 years to unwind all of it.
all of it? Yeah, but with her, how long was that period of time?
Well, I worked with her for about 18 months, and then
Oh,
I
okay.
realized that I was dying to try to see if I could have a Broadway career in New York because I was a trained singer and I had two Broadway
Ah,
coaches who both told me I could work. So I went to the city, I got a job in an art gallery, and went to method acting school and went to movement school and, you know, dancing school and kept my voice lessons going. And after a couple of years, I realized that I hated performing.
I've heard this before from
I
people.
just hated it, right? And the business was really sleazy. especially for a young gay man. It was really sleazy, and I just wasn't going to have it. So eventually I left, but one of my voice teachers later called me when I was living in Philly and said, "You know what living in the moment is when you're training for the stage?" He said, "Really being present in the moment and just going with what you feel." I had learned so much about myself and my emotional life in that training. And he said, there are some people teaching Eastern mysticism that will teach you how to live in the moment all the time. Right? This is 1988. This is not prevalent in the culture. This is like a hidden gem. Right? Now you can find this everywhere. Right? But in those days, I was living in Philly. I used to get on a train on a Wednesday night at 6 o'clock, get to New York, go to a sitting in the middle of Manhattan, get back on the train, go home, just so I could experience living in the moment. And these people who taught that were sort of students of Sri Bhagavan Rajneesh or Osho. I don't know if you know him. He had the big cult in Oregon.
I do. Well, I know exactly who that is. Yes.
Okay. And
Yeah.
so
I remember when that was going on and there's a big documentary on it called Wild Country.
I watched it. It's been amazing to see. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, they had a model of holistic healing, which included deep tissue massage work, holistic breath work or holotropic breathing, counseling, meditation, and mindfulness practices. And that became the second model for me. And the easiest entree for me, I just had an undergraduate degree, was to go to massage school. I could become a massage therapist in about a year and work with people directly. So that's where I started. And then eventually I took a training in energy healing for 3 years. And then I felt that was disempowering to clients. So I went and became a counseling psychologist instead. And then capped that off, I added a yoga teacher training where I taught people how to meditate and be mindful. And so gradually that morphs into where I am now, which is on my own. But in the meantime, I also worked in trauma treatment when it was sort of new. I was the director of a trauma treatment project at a big local mental health agency with 400 employees. And we got to study with the best experts in the world live before Zoom existed. All these video cameras, live link cameras to Boston. Bessel van der Kolk.
I know exactly who that is because I read
And
his
all of
book.
his staff, and also Bruce Perry, who just wrote a book with Oprah Winfrey called What Happened to You. So all this trauma and difficulty and heartache and heartbreak and then the screaming and crying for a year and a half when I realized at 52 that I'd been sexually abused, and so had others in my family. That has brought me to where I really, as I age, I just want to help other people get through that and also realize the truth is already there inside of them. They don't need anybody telling them what's true. And they can, if they get some basic human skills, which nobody teaches us, they can also wake up spiritually. So I like to teach the basic human skills, and they don't teach in school, like, do you know whether your thoughts are true or false? Because most of us think every thought in our head is true, and most of them are false. Do you know what your emotions even are or where they come from? Audience, did anybody train you in this stuff? Nobody trained me. If I hadn't gone to acting school and done a lot of therapy after acting school, I still wouldn't know. And so I teach people how to first be human and then using very simple tools, how to wake up into their divine enlightened state, or to put it scientifically, open their right brain up and get it online.
One thing this is way back when you first started talking,
Mm-hmm.
something I didn't know, and it makes complete sense to me, which is people who have been abused are uncoordinated. And it makes sense now.
Right.
And I was thinking about a particular friend of mine that I had in high school. He was not a close friend, but he was in my circle of people.
Right.
And he was textbook that. I don't know what was going on with him, but one time
Mm-hmm.
I went to his house with another friend who was a little bit closer to him, and we were down in his basement looking at a treadmill,
Hmm.
and we were talking about the treadmill, and his stepfather was suddenly at the top of the stairs going, uh, he said his name and what are you guys doing down there? It was this really spooky voice,
Yeah.
and he got really scared.
Oh, yeah.
And and then he eventually wound up in the hospital um, with stomach disorders of some type, maybe IBS or
Hmm.
colitis or something. He
Yeah.
was super skinny, super twitchy, uncoordinated, and frightened.
Oh,
And I'm
sure.
thinking this guy was being abused in some way, whether it was hitting or, just screaming, or maybe it was sexual abuse. I don't really know.
Yeah.
I never got close enough to find out. But years later, I thought about this, and when I started to learn about this stuff, and I um, thought this guy was tortured, and he would
Yeah.
the interesting thing about it is he would call when he was in the hospital, he would call my mother and talk to her. He didn't really know her, but she was kind to him,
Yeah.
and he would tell her. He wouldn't reveal too much, but I thought, geez, this guy is so desperately disconnected from anything at his home that he's reaching out to my mother, who he didn't even know, but she
Right.
was nice to him.
Right.
And I'm thinking, I wish he's not alive anymore. I don't know what happened. I heard years later he died, and I don't know if it was from his stomach issues or
Hmm.
if it was suicide. I don't really know.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, I wish I had known this stuff back then and could have helped him in some way, because I know that's what was going on. I just know it.
Yeah. And when people are being abused, they're also being emotionally neglected. And we can go back generations and understand that most parents, most preachers, teachers, rabbis, whatever, didn't understand their own thoughts and their own emotional life. And so they couldn't teach any of us about that either. And so, somebody who's being abused, you can bet the people that are abusing them don't care about how they feel or what they feel, or they wouldn't be abusing them all the time. So there's a huge amount of what I see as endemic or epidemic in the culture is that there is emotional neglect and ignorance, and even cognitive neglect and ignorance. We don't realize that our thoughts are largely false, and those false thoughts generate very strong emotions. They're real emotions,
Yeah.
but real emotions can come from false sources. The false emotion generally leads to problems and certainly leads to distress, because generally those emotions that come from some false thought are adrenaline based. Just like if you spoke a lie to a lie detector machine, it would detect the lie because your adrenal levels go up and your body changes. Heart rate goes up, respiration goes up, perspiration goes up, blood pressure goes up. So whether you're saying that lie out loud or you're just listening to it in your head, my theory is it affects your physiology badly. And so a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the suffering that they endure could be stopped if they only understood the source of their emotion, and if they understood that a lot of their thoughts are false and they don't really need to listen to them. Like, all my thoughts about what terrible thing might happen because my partner is on a trip, abroad. I could have this whole Megillah, this scroll unroll in my head that says this could go wrong, this could go wrong, this could go wrong, this could go wrong. I'm sure your audience members have this happen all the time. And I look over there because thought generates on the left side of the brain, and I say, yeah, there's that stupid set of lies again.
Mm-hmm.
I have an acronym for them. I call them lies, or GDFL. You can make up, I don't know how polite your
No,
listeners
you
are,
can say whatever it is. It's fine.
is a goddamn fucking lie.
Mm-hmm.
And we use GDFL for short because it's a nice acronym. It's more polite than saying all those words. So I'll turn and look at that kind of metaphorically at the left side of my brain and go, that's a GDFL. I'm not going to listen to that because it's only going to make me upset for nothing. And how many people suffer all this excess emotion and confusion because they don't even know to check whether the thought is true.
Well, yeah, and that stuff gets, put in there very young based on a lot of different things.
including trauma. Like all my thoughts
Yeah, well,
about the future
especially
are
that. Yeah.
catastrophic,
Hmm.
right?
Well, let's say you had a thought that, which is not an uncommon thought, everybody's out to get me.
Yes.
Okay, which is a common thing. People have that, especially if they've been traumatized or they've been in some genuinely difficult situations where people maybe were out to get them.
Right.
Or, and so when people say that to me, this is my answer. I go, it's actually worse than that. They're not even thinking about you.
That's right. And I was living in New York City when I realized I didn't need to worry about how I was walking or holding my books or anything anymore like I did in school because nobody cared. There were 10,000 people on Fifth Avenue. Nobody noticed me. And that idea that everybody's out to get us is a sort of inverted egotism.
Yeah.
All right, I'm
Hmm.
so important that everybody's going to attack me.
Hmm.
Sorry. No, for most of us, that's just not the case.
Everybody's out to care about you. Also
Well,
not true.
that may not be true either, but
Right. But
there are
it's
people who
equally
will
as
care about
valid
you.
of a thought. I mean, or
That's right,
invalid.
right. You make the reverse thought and it's still not true.
Right. But it's comical when you do that. When you reverse it, it becomes very comical.
It is.
Like,
And
when I
and
walk down the street, I can just feel that everybody really cares about me.
right. And it's
What?
obviously silly, but the silliness, the humor really helps us to not take the thought seriously. So when I teach people the GDFL, they invariably laugh in my face. And then when they use it or they teach it to others, they laugh. Because it's very helpful to counteract strong negative thoughts with very strong negative language.
Well, there's an interesting exercise that I did. I don't know where I got the idea from. I think it's sort of, I did this workbook years ago. It was, the personal growth guy, Zig Ziglar from way in
Yes.
the past there.
Yeah.
I don't know how far in the past, but he had a workbook on how to achieve uh, your goals in life in all areas, not just, career, but everything
Mhm.
and relationships and stuff. And so you had to put down your short, medium, and long term goals. Then the next step is what are the things I need to do to achieve this goal? And then the third part was who do I need to ask for assistance in some way? Who can I go to? That was the hardest part for me.
Mm.
Was you're not supposed to ask for help. That's weak. Now
That's
there's a
right.
belief. There's a belief. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And certainly men get that I think even more than women
Hmm.
of strong men don't need to ask for help.
Right.
So that's kind of stood in my way until I did this thing. And I remember the first few times I started to consciously ask people for help in different areas. And the response was so positive. People love to be asked their opinions and their advice, and for the most part, people are really generous and honored by
Hmm.
that. The
Right.
opposite of what are you, a weakling? Are you coming to me for help? That no one ever said that, by the way.
Right. Right. We have all kinds of beliefs, all kinds of deep held thoughts in our
Yeah.
minds like that about ourselves, about others, and what others will say and think and do about us and about the future.
Well, yeah, and it's an interesting thing to go through, and then I started to go through all of these beliefs as much
Mm.
as I could. What do I think about money? What do I think about people that have money? What do I think about parents? What do I think about um, friendships? What do I think about school, businesses, all these things? And some of the things when I wrote them down, they were like so glaringly untrue,
Right.
glaring.
Right.
I mean, let's talk about money for one. That's a very common one. Only assholes have money because they wouldn't have attained money without being terrible to other people.
Right.
Well,
That one my grandfather taught me. Yeah.
yeah, it gets taught a lot,
Yeah.
right? You have to grab for what you want because no one's going to help you ever, and if you have to, it's dog eat dog sort of attitude about
Right.
life.
Right.
Now, are there people that are attain success doing that, financial success? Absolutely, there are. Are there people that attain financial success that don't do that? Yes, there are.
That's right. That's right. But you know, the with this old phrase, the unexamined life is not worth living, right? When you have all of that cognitive material in your mind, all of that's in the way of being yourself, and all of it's in the way of the truth, what the truth really is. And so when I'm trying to help people in my office or in an online course that I'm going to teach, and with a book that I've just written, I'm trying to show them that you can sort of divide your thoughts into categories, thoughts about self, about others, and about the future. And you'll find that almost all thoughts in all categories are false in some way or another. And when a falsehood arises, it invariably causes a negative, unpleasant emotion. So this, the suffering that's caused by believing those thoughts is actually something that can be gotten rid of very simply, but in a sense by repeatedly noticing when the thoughts arise and basically calling them out as lies, and then also noticing the negative emotion that arises. You know, what we want to do with emotion, if it's from a good source, we want to use it for insight and then to take action. Bessel van der Kolk used to say, this is the brain's way of changing your life. This is putting energy in motion. Motion. I love that and never forgot it, right? And you can do great things with positive energy that's coming from a real source, even if it's painful energy like my grandma died and I'm grieving the loss of her. Well, what does that teach me? It teaches me I wasn't even aware of how much I loved her until she died. And how will that change my life? Well, it might make me love and appreciate the living people in my life far more when I realize how much I was grieving for grandma. So that emotion that we have in us is very, very useful if it comes from reality, if it comes from the sense world. If it comes from this is mostly nonsense. It's not based in the world of the senses and verifiable information. It's based in one thought building on another, building some sort of like Dracula's castle in your head. And so if we get rid of that, very simple methods get rid of that over time. It takes time. If we get rid of that, then we live most of the time in a state of contentment, peace, love, and freedom, and with our truthfulness intact. Now, that's what the Hindus say that your true nature is: consciousness, love, bliss, freedom, peace, and truth. And that, you know, my yoga path in terms of enlightenment or liberation has been my primary path, where I began to meld spirituality and psychology. And I found that therapy wasn't enough to get rid of all my suffering, not only because I was a trauma survivor, and so there's some literal brain changes that can't be reversed, but also because the ego is the source of our problems, because the ego itself isn't true. It's a set of words about you. And you, in your right brain, you can experience yourself as infinity and eternity. And then your left brain tries to put that ocean into a glass of water and define it as a set of words, and then defend those set of words, which causes all kinds of trouble with your friends and family. And all that can be eradicated in the very simple spiritual traditions of liberation. So I think what drove me and what may be driving a lot of your listeners is we don't want to suffer anymore. The less I suffer, the happier I am, the more I'm aware of my basic nature, the happier I am. I don't need a fancy car. I don't need a fancy house. I already have inside of me love, bliss or contentment, freedom and peace. And I'm a natural truth teller. When I don't tell the truth, the lie detector goes off.
Yeah.
So my body doesn't like even the subjective lies that thought is, or thoughts are.
You know, I was thinking about just when you were talking about the suffering,
Hmm.
particularly mental anguish, which I'm not talking about physical suffering, but mental
Yeah,
anguish, the
yeah.
thoughts and the different shame and regret and fear and all those things. Um, what do people get out of that they want to continue it? Because I think there's something to be had there that is falsely, but is serving that person in that time.
That's an awesome question. I love that one. They get a sense of familiar pain. They have an identification with discomfort. I'll give you and the audience a little story. So I was living in New York City for about 10 years, and I was taking a course in energy healing, getting more and more sensitive to energy. One day I was walking in the front door of my building, a nice doorman elevator building in New York, and I realized, gee, I feel insecure all the time on the streets of New York. Why do I live here? Oh, I live here because insecurity is familiar to me. I've lived with anxiety my whole life. I feel like anxiety defines who I am. It's an integral part of my identity to be uncomfortable or suffering. And I think for people, it's really hard to let go and realize, oh, wait, that discomfort isn't who I am. That's an add-on. Because it's very sad to realize I've been living in discomfort thinking that's who I am when it's actually not true. It's a very sad moment, but it's a very liberating moment because you say, oh, wait a minute, I've been familiar with my discomfort, so I thought it was who I was. But I can live my life without discomfort and still be a person. I'll just be identifying myself differently. I can
Hmm.
identify myself with love, bliss, freedom, peace, contentment, and truthfulness. I can identify myself with being awake and aware and mindful and present. I don't need to identify myself with unfamiliar pain to be a self. I'm like, wow, that was a really that's a good revelation to have. Oh, you
Yeah.
mean I don't have to think of myself as having a middle name called Anxiety instead of Eric? Jonathan Anxiety Labman. Oh, okay. No, it could be Jonathan Eric Labman or, oh, how about that? Awesome. So I think that there's that secondary gain that I get an identity out of my suffering. But it's a bad one, though.
Yeah, and but to let it go is into the unknown is a little frightening, I think, too, for some people. Because now, if the familiar is
Yeah.
gone,
Yeah.
now I'm into the unknown, and what if it's worse?
Well, and this is something else that people are never taught about, that everything that we encounter that's new, new person, new place, new activity, even if it's something we really want to do, a new job we know about, all of that new learning, new place provokes an animal level of anxiety, more than usual adrenaline. So we have to be willing to be uncomfortable for a little while, even to explore a new identity or understand where we're going to end up. Well, we can't really know where we're going to end up, but we can know it'll be with less suffering. And yet still the animal brain is going to say, wait a minute, I can't do that. That's scary. And there is a natural adrenaline about looking at an identity and not knowing, but it's not going to last once you take the step into the new identity. The adrenaline dealing with anything new lasts about 20 minutes, and then it goes. Like talking to you today, right? You're a new person to me. There's more than the usual adrenaline, and we had a nice warm-up conversation. So within a few minutes, my adrenaline level's almost back to normal. And everybody that wants a new identity will have to cope with that little bit of extra adrenaline, but it doesn't last. And it doesn't have to be a barrier to feeling better.
When you're talking about these things, and you're talking about what is taught in school and what is not taught in school, wouldn't it have been just fabulous to hear these kinds of things as a young person? I mean, my God, the freedom and the ability to move through the world in a way that is not, doesn't hamstring you at every turn because of your thoughts.
Right.
What great knowledge that would be. And it's very simple. The things you're saying are very simple.
Right. But nobody teaches them to us in school.
Well, because they don't know them. That's the
They don't
thing.
know them. And also, the schooling system, the public education was set up to create compliant workers, not to create critical thinkers who would challenge the boss. And there's still a lot of that regurgitation of information. That's why school is so boring to so many people.
Well, I always thought I did well in school because I had a really good memory. I
That's
did
right.
because I had that gift. I could read something once and I remember it, so it wasn't hard for me
Yeah.
basically. Um, and I'd see people struggling, and I'd be like, "Well, didn't you read that? Didn't you? You don't remember it?" No, I don't remember it. Partly because they weren't interested, I'm sure, and
Right.
partly because I think that's a sort of a biological ability that you're born with too. Some of that is just, a
Right.
gift.
But also, if you're distracted by enough kind of rampant roiling emotion, if you're being traumatized or abused, you know, your learning centers are offline in those instances. When people are traumatized and they reach the sort of top of the window of tolerance for adrenaline, they go into a freeze mode like a possum playing dead. Their
Hmm.
brain literally goes dark. The language does not generate for a while. So if they're in a lot of emotional turmoil, they're not going to be able to learn either.
Yeah, and you wonder about some of these, kids you were in school with that were, weird. Let's say, just say they were weird or they're just off or
Right,
troubled, and you knew who they were. There was a certain percentage of kids that were just kind of, off in
right. They're
some
messed
way.
up. Yeah,
Yeah, but no one ever, it didn't come up like I'm not sure why it would, but maybe there's something going on. Maybe you need to have some compassion for these people and more patience, or
right,
there were some, and there were some very kind teachers, and there was also some that just didn't care at all. They didn't either know, or they weren't there to do that. They weren't
yeah,
therapists of any kind. They just were like, learn your times tables.
right, right. So, I was fortunate to have a lot of really kind teachers. I think they kept me alive, honestly. And I had some bad ones in terms of spiritual teachers. I've had, no, I did not have more than one involvement in a cult where I lived in a group, but I've had other cult-like teachers, and they really don't want you to know much about your humanity because they want to tell you what to do and how to think and how to believe and how following them and giving them lots of money or maybe your body or your allegiance will lead you to
Yeah.
enlightenment or some sort of superior state. And that's how people get trapped into that. If we had the skills in school to deal with our thoughts and our feelings, which, by the way, is being remediated in some schools now with programs called social and emotional learning. I just found this out from a client of mine who worked in that field, which I knew nothing about. But in general, it's not taught in school. When it's taught, the kids do better academically in a verifiable, testable way. And so, what I can hope, what I do really now is remediate people's education in being human and then also give the option of, if you want to wake up beyond living with the crap that the ego keeps producing, you can actually go that far. I'd like to offer people the whole gamut of healing from, fix the relationship with your boss to um, dissolve your ego and enjoy your liberation freedom. And,
Yeah.
people listening, they're on all kinds of different paths and looking for all kinds of different skills. And I've tried to make the way I teach extremely simple now. I don't need to prove to anybody I have an intellect. What I need is to help them.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, is it work or doesn't it? Let's keep it to that.
Right. Keep it simple and you'll be super, right?
Yeah. Well, it's funny when you talk about. I always ask this question to myself or anybody that is like, why would I want to follow a leader that wants to be followed? Why would I want to do that? Because what the motivation for people wanting to be leaders to a certain degree, to in the first place is like, first of all, they need it for some reason. What is that reason? They need
Egotism
power.
generally,
Yeah,
and
egotism.
insecurity.
Yeah, lack of power. So they want to get the power from outside.
Right.
That's part of it. And also it's an ego stroke, of course.
That's
But
right.
I have a mistrust of when I see somebody who's, certainly if they're seeking power with any kind of avarice, I'm suspect, very
Yeah,
suspect. Like,
absolutely.
what is going on there? Somebody who's seeking to be in a position, who is advocating for other people to participate and be, equal to them in terms of their what they're offering to a situation, that I kind of like. I mean, it's like,
Sure.
okay, well, you're a good cheerleader for people advocating for themselves.
Right.
So no gurus.
Right. I mean, and that's important for people to know. When I start working with people, I mean, sometimes I have to work with people for a long time if there's been a serious history of trauma. But mostly what I say to people is, if I don't become obsolete in your life, I have not done my job. I have failed you. What I want is for you to know how to be awakened and enlightened yourself, or how to be effectively using your emotions and your thoughts for yourself if you don't want enlightenment. That's what I want to do for people. And I don't want to foster any kind of dependency relationship. And I think that our leaders, the problem, Bob, is that our leaders have a model that was given to us in school, which is you have to look up to somebody and they have to teach you everything that you need to know, and you need their approval in order to be okay. All of which is okay, they may be able to teach you something, but their approval is not going to make you okay. Your only way of being okay is to realize you yourself, for instance, if you're traumatized, you are not the cause of that. That shame does not belong to you, that belongs to the perpetrator. The guilt of being traumatized, especially when you're a child, belongs to the adults who are perpetrating abuse on you. And so somebody's approval, whether it's your spouse or your boss or, the president of the United States, their approval is not going to help you deal with your false thoughts about yourself. It will not help your self-esteem longer than about an hour. There's no point going for the leader's approval. You actually need to go for your own sense of what's true about you and your own sense of yourself, and then approve of that.
You are preaching to the choir on that
I know,
one.
but hopefully it helps your listeners too,
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you said you have you finished your book? Is it out?
Yeah, the book's been out for about a year and I'm an
Okay.
unknown
What is
author.
that book? Let's tell the fans, because you
Okay.
got a lot of them now.
All right. Well, so the best way to get in touch with me first is just to write to support at simplyawake.com. So simply awake, SIMPLYAWAKE.com, all one word. And then request the new book. Just say new book, and I'll send it to them. The book is called Being Human and Waking Up. It is available for purchase on Amazon as a Kindle or as a nice big workbook. It's 8.5 by 11. Um,
Oh,
and lots of some original art in it from a friend of mine who's a great painter nearby. And lots of space to write and to do exercises, to actually work with this stuff. And then in January, I'm going to teach a course, 13-week course, 1 hour a week, using the material from the book to give people basic instruction. But the way to get to me most simply is just to write to me, support at simplyawake.com. Everything else about being human and waking up, the book and all that, I'll tell you. But it's so hard for people to remember the details that I just want to leave them with that simple support at simplyawake.com. And I'm going to give you the book, guys and gals who are listening. I'm giving it away. I want you to have it. It's what I can leave of my suffering and redemption in my own life. is
Well,
that
how
book.
generous and wonderful.
Well, you're generous. You're giving this away for free, so why shouldn't I do the same and honor you for that, right?
Okay, well, boy, we are a team today. That's fantastic. I love the fact that it's a workbook because I had mentioned that Zig Ziglar workbook that I did. It was so valuable to actually. There's something the brain registers things differently when you put pen to paper. I don't know what that is, but it does than just thinking or talking. It actually adds another layer of
Well,
solidity.
it's a sensory experience, and the brain records that sensory experience of writing or typing. So I type my notes when I meet with clients in a different way than it records the words
Yeah.
auditorily. So I think it's great if people are willing to write. If they're not, I get it. It's, 2024, but the writing is very helpful for some people. So they can have their choice. They can have a Kindle or they can have a workbook. But if I send it to them for free, it's going to be a PDF.
Yeah, but you can still write things down on paper
Oh,
if you want
absolutely.
to. I just like the idea of holding a pen and having ink come out on paper. The tactile part of it is even more so than the tactile part of typing on a
That's
keyboard.
right. That's right.
Um, and
But,
it's call me old fashioned.
yeah, but I'm a lefty, so I always smeared the ink. So I learned to type when I was 13, and that was very nice and tactile because we were working on, not even electric. We were working on manual typewriters in those days. Never mind a computer,
Now here's an interesting thing to me anyway, because it has to do with me.
Okay.
When I was a child, I gravitated toward my left hand,
Hmm.
and I would write with my left hand. And my mother decided that I would have an easier life if I was like other people and was right handed. So she, quote, corrected me and turned me into a right handed person that
Hmm.
way. She was actually scared about me being left handed. So she did it out of concern and love and wanting the best. Now,
Right.
I don't know if that affected me in any way. It sure obviously affected me in some way,
I'm sure it did.
but
Yeah.
it's sort of a right brain, left brain kind of a thing. And so, maybe it actually enhanced things. I don't in some areas. I don't really know.
Well, you would have developed your left brain far more than you would have if you'd been writing left-handed, which was a right brain activity. So she gave you a bit more brain wholeness, perhaps than you might have had, or a different kind of brain wholeness. But the left side is controlled by the right brain loosely, and that tends to lead to more creativity if you're listening more to the right brain. But you were a comedian, so you got all of it. You got the
Well,
obviously got the right brain stuff, even if you didn't get to use the left hand to write.
yeah, I mean, I've always been in some sort of the arts in some way. Not
Right.
painting, but I did music, I did comedy,
Hmm.
I did writing for television. I mean, that none of that is corporate kind of, factotum type work.
Right, and you've enjoyed that. I can see on your face, right? You've
Yeah,
enjoyed the right brain creativity. Yeah.
yeah. So and so maybe she helped me. I don't know. I don't resent her for anything, but
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing, particularly when when you talk about your parents because they're the biggest influences on people.
Yeah.
Is to see them, to learn a little bit about your parents, what their childhoods were like, and how they saw the world,
Yeah.
and what untruths were they living with in their minds. Because once I sort of was able to do some of that, I had a lot more compassion for them. I wasn't as like I was like, how dare you teach me this? That's not true.
Right, right. But even understanding our parents sometimes doesn't explain some of their behavior and some of their abhorrent behavior to us.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, that's, people are, it's an interesting thing. I had a woman on the show that does this type of therapy called brain spotting, which is very similar to EMDR and
Yes.
some of this stuff. And her whole thing is all trauma is generational.
Hmm.
If you think back, like the people who are perpetrating, things on children, what happened to them and what happened to those people, and take it back, and you don't really
Absolutely.
know. I mean,
Yeah.
humanity is kind of a brutal species. And I'm
Mm,
laughing because it's uncomfortable, but
I
the
know. Yeah.
we've brutalized each other a lot over the years,
Yeah.
over the generations. So it doesn't surprise me that certain cultures, and particularly some of the more marginalized subcultures, would have a ton of trauma
That's
just sort
right.
of baked into the system.
And yet, so when people come to see me, if they have anger at their parents, I first want to hear them be angry at their parents because
Mhm.
what people tend to do is rationalize and then the anger gets stuffed and they're holding it and they never let it out and they never talk about the hurt underneath the anger or the fear underneath the anger. So I think it's very helpful eventually to get to see your parents and where they came from, even your grandparents and where they came from. And, realizing one of my grandmothers, never even finished high school, got married at 16, and she was always more concerned about how her hair looked and how her nails were,
Yeah.
and playing mahjong, right? And winning, than she was about philosophy or equality or social justice or any of that stuff, right? She was the family princess because in a Jewish family, she was blonde haired and blue eyed when she was born.
Oh,
So she
okay.
could pass, and that was a big deal when she was growing up. It was still a very anti-Semitic culture, even around here in eastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey.
Yeah. Well, I had a similar upbringing with a Reformed Jewish
Hmm.
family. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. So I had this. I guess it's a joke. The difference between Catholic guilt and Jewish guilt. Catholic guilt is fear of God and divine retribution, and Jewish guilt is fear of giving your mother a heart attack. Very simple, direct, down to earth.
Sorry, that really got me. That's awesome.
Well, it's
Right.
it's a joke that, yeah, I mean, it's, if you get it, you really get it.
Yeah, that's great. Well,
Hmm.
yeah. So,
My other favorite joke is the 3, 4 Jewish women are having lunch at a deli, and the waitress comes over and she says, "Is anything all right?"
right.
So
And
great.
you probably heard this one too. This is maybe the only joke I actually remember. I'm not very good at remembering jokes. How many Jewish mothers does it take to change a light bulb?
You tell. I know the answer, but go ahead.
None. I'll sit in the dark and suffer.
That's exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that kind of weird guilt. But, I do see that in the Western cultures that have come out of the Middle East, in Islam, in Judaism, and Christianity. Guilt is the thing added to us almost immediately when we're born. And all of us struggle in our thoughts about ourselves, feeling like there's something wrong with us. And when I really go at that with people is when they really start to break free of their self-doubt and their self-esteem problems. It's
Yeah.
there really is no evidence that we're born wicked or born sinful or that we're guilty just because we're alive. And I think
Well, what a
that's done such harm to so many people in the Western worlds. I really do.
it's the ultimate manipulation tool. If you can convince people that what they are, their essence, is something flawed and needs to be corrected, you've got them from right out of the chute.
That's right. You got him
And that
and
their and that
forever.
their and that their sexual impulses are bad, that's sinful, because that's the life force right there.
That's
And
right.
now who you are, the essence of who you are, is flawed, and you need some sort of authority to guide you out of that,
Right.
and or control you. It's a very odd thing that humans have done to themselves
But
to
I've
create that
discovered
kind
that
of.
there's that great antidote to that is that because we have a truth sense within us, even if
Yeah.
we're deceiving ourselves, we will start to suffer. So we don't have to wait for some great leader who's somehow risen above their own sinfulness to tell us that we're in sin or we're flawed. We can figure it out ourselves by our level of suffering.
Yeah.
If I'm not
Yeah.
telling myself the truth, I'm going to be anxious in some way or another. So we don't even really need those authority figures, but 2,000 years or 5,000 years of emperors and kings and, big bosses, it's a little hard to overcome in, one generation. It's going to be it's a work in progress.
Yeah, it sure is.
Yeah.
When I think about somebody goes, "Oh, I don't feel like I'm good enough," and my answer is, "Have you met other people? Because look around.
Right.
How great are they?"
But the truth is that the thought that I'm not good enough is the original GDFL.
Yeah.
It's the original big lie that everybody's been taught that causes the most mental suffering of any thought that I've ever seen in myself or anybody I've ever worked with. It's some variation of I'm not good enough, I'm wicked, I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm at fault for my trauma. Whatever it is, all of that is the black hole of humanity.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's I don't think other creatures on the planet really have that. It's a real special thing that we have. That and thumbs. Those are the two biggies.
Great.
John, what a delightful talk.
And likewise, I've really enjoyed it. It's been
Yeah, me
so
too.
comfortable too. So
Yeah.
very comfortable. Thank you
I feel
so
like
much.
I've known you for a very long time, even though it's been an hour. And that's a good thing. That means something was connected between us. Support at simplyawake.com, folks.
Yeah, that's it. And I'll get you. I also offer a free 15-minute consult to people who write to me, but they don't have to remember all the details. I'll tell them. And I
Okay.
want to just say thank you to you again and remind your audience once more. Please give this guy some likes and some support and some 5-star ratings and some practical love because this is a gift from his heart to you all.
Thank you, John. You have a beautiful day, a
You too.
blessed day, a fantastic day, a free day, a
Thanks.
joyous day, a day filled with laughter and love.
Well, so far it's been a great start. Thanks to you.
Thank you
Take good
so
care,
much.
okay?
You too. Much appreciation for you folks listening to The Exploding Human. The website is theexplodinghuman.com. You can listen on YouTube. That is The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. Once again, I want to thank Jon Labman. If you need to get a hold of him, once again, it is support at simplyawaken.com. Have a great day. Thank you.